In the previous video, I introduced to you 4 of the 8 primitive data types, and they're all integers. When you were small, remember, you learn about numbers, and then along with that, you learn decimals and the alphabet. And so in this tutorial, I'll be showing you how they exist in Java. So after finishing integers, it's time to move on to decimals. And as you can see here, there are 2 data types that can be used to represent decimals, and they're float and double. Remember when the data types to represent integers have different storage spaces, and because of the storage space, they could hold other data types? Now, it's similar with float and double as well. Float has a storage of 32 bits, and a double has storage of 64 bits. Just as an integers, when a long could hold an int, the same is true in that a double can hold a float. However, there is one difference. Remember, when you type an integer for a long, the default number that the computer interprets it as is an int. For decimals though, double becomes the default value instead. Now I'm going to use my datatypes.java file so that I can have a note of all my primitive data types. And to test out decimals, type float space decimal num equals 2.75 semicolon. And then to see what decimal num is, let's type system.out.println decimal num. Go here to our terminal window, and if we compile our code, you can see that there's actually an incompatible errors type. Now the thing here is that the computer treated this decimal as a double, and since a float can't hold a double, we get an error. And to fix this, we have to type F after the 2.75. So I'm going to type an F here. And as you may have noticed, this action is similar to typing L after long to let the computer know that we are claiming a different data type. Save the code, and if you compile the code again, you can see that there's nothing there, meaning that there's no error, so that's a good thing. Just to show you guys the example for decimals, I'm going to type double decimal num2 equals, let's say, 543.4539. And you can print out both decimal values. I'm going to edit my system.out.println statement here, type plus, and then I'm going to add a space plus decimal num2. Save the code, compile the code, and then execute. And as you can see here, we have the 2 decimal numbers that we declared and initialized. Now to test out addition like we did before in the previous tutorial, remember that we cannot add double values to float because a float can't hold a double. To test it out, type float decimal sum equals decimal num plus 2.5. Now, do you think this will have an error? Let's see. Save the code, and if we compile the code, we get an incompatible types error. Remember, since we added 2.5, we essentially added a double to a float, which is not allowed. But if we change this word float to double, everything is fine, since a double can hold any float and any other data type of double. In this case, 2.75f is the float that decimal sum can add, and 2.5 is the double that decimal sum can also add. Now the thing is, you might be complaining that numbers are so hard in Java, but they're ultimately the foundation of Java's computers depend on them to function. Although there are multiple ways to represent doubles and integers, the numerous data types are ultimately there just in case a programmer wants code with less storage or more precise calculation, especially with decimals. Now you see the double value is 2 times more precise than float, as it can store more decimal places, but this precision does come at the cost of storage space. And it's always ultimately up to the programmer as to which data type is best to use. So we're almost done, and there's only 2 more data types to be learned. And let's start off with char. And now that we're done with your numbers, look at your keyboard. Each little button has a character on it, and the data type char is exactly what it sounds like. It just holds a data value of a single character. Taking a look at your keyboard, you don't have just the traditional alphabet, but you also have numbers, and the comma and the period. You can declare and initialize a char by typing char, my char equals, single quote, m single quote, and then a semicolon. Okay, we can print out my char by typing out system.out.println my char. If we compile and execute our code, we get the letter M, and that's not very surprising. But why do we use char? Now, you see, in the event that we are using Java to look at like a huge text file, we use char to determine certain characters in a document. Finally, the last of the 8 primitive data types in Java is Boolean. which only holds two values, true or false. Although Boolean is very simple as it only represents two values, it's actually very powerful. We'll teach you later the applications of using a Boolean because it's an important tool to determine whether or not certain parts of Java code should or should not run. To declare a Boolean value, you type Boolean value equals, and you can say true or false, so I'm just going to say true. Now if you type system.out.println value and we compile and execute the code, we get true. Now that you have finished learning the 8 primitive data types, it is important that you practice with them so that you can get used to how the data types function and work together. Because these primitive data types are the foundations of Java, as these keywords are part of the Java language. As you learn more and more about Java programming in these tutorials, you'll learn how to manipulate these primitive data types as well as other data types that you create as well.